I'm Chris Riddell, and this is my book, The Guardians of Magic, The Cloud Horse Chronicles. Chapter 1, The Runcible Spoon. Zam Zephyr woke early and climbed out of bed, careful not to disturb the other apprentice bakers of Bakery No. 9, who were still fast asleep around him. It was the day before the Grand Duchess of Troutwine's tea ball, and Zam was too excited and nervous to stay in bed. Today they would bake for the tea ball tomorrow. All 12 bakeries in the city competed for the honour of making the most delicious treats for the ball. If anything went wrong again after last year's disaster that put Bakery No. 9 at the bottom of the heap, Zam and his friends would be sent home in disgrace. The thought of his father's disappointed face was too much to bear. No, Zam thought. He would do anything he could to make sure his baking was perfect. In the corner of the attic dormitory, his best friend, Langdale the goat boy, was gently snoring. Beneath the flour sack, his hooves twitched as he dreamed of chasing blue butterflies through the summer pine forests of the western mountains. In the other corner, the 2 shellac sisters clutched the comfort shawl they shared. In the cots in between, the gnome boys from the grey hills slept soundless and still, 5 to a blanket, their small grey-tufted heads just visible. Looking out of the window, Zam could see the golden roofs of the palaces glittering in the early morning sunlight. He gazed up at a billowing cloud and made a wish. "To bake the best gingerbread ever," he whispered. Cloud horse, far from view, make this wish of mine come true." Zam took his apron and cap from the hook and crept out of the attic, leaving his friends to their dreams. Zam ran all the way down the stairs to the basement, opened the door to the flavour library and stepped inside. This was his favourite place. He loved how precise and tidy and ordered everything was here. He smiled to himself. With everyone asleep upstairs, it was the perfect time of day to practice without interruptions. Shelves lined the basement walls from floor to vaulted ceiling. Looking up through the glass paving stone, Zam could see the shadows of feet walking overhead as people passed the doors of Bakery No. 9. The shelves around him were stacked with jars of all shapes and sizes, each clearly labelled. Zam selected the jars he needed, opening each in turn and taking pinches of the powders they contained. Carefully, he placed the spices on little squares of baking parchment, which he folded neatly and placed in different pockets of his apron. Satisfied with his choices, Zam crossed the stone floor to a large chest of drawers set in an alcove. He opened a drawer labelled "The Index of Crusts" and selected one with crinkle-cut edges, and memorised the baking instructions written in small lettering on the underside. "For a crumbly texture, short intense mixing, and slow bake in quiet oven," Zam read. The memory of the calm, reassuring sound of the head baker's voice filled his head, as it always did when Zam read his recipes. "For a more robust biscuit, easeful mixing with broad, generous spoon, and a short, fierce bake in a busy oven." "Broad, generous spoon," Zam repeated to himself, returning the crinkle-cut crust to the drawer and closing it. He looked up and was about to select one of the wooden spoons which hung from the hooks in the ceiling when he trod on something. It was a large spoon he hadn't noticed, lying on the flagstone floor. "This is so careless," Zam muttered, picking it up. The spoon was broad and long-handled, carved from a single piece of wood by the look of it. Zam turned it over. It was a slotted spoon, full of small holes, with 3 large ones near the base of the handle. "Easeful mixing with a broad, generous spoon," the head baker's voice sounded in Zam's head. "Perfect," he said, wiping the spoon on his apron before slipping it into his pocket. He selected a favourite battered old book from a shelf, The Art of Baking. "There you are," he said happily, and climbed the back stairs to the kitchen. An hour later, the other apprentice bakers had been woken by the 6 o'clock gong and were filing in, putting on their caps and rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Balthasar Boabab, the head baker of Bakery No. 9, followed them into the kitchen, smiling. "Good morning, apprentices," he said cheerfully, peering over the top of his half-rimmed spectacles. As you know, the 12 bakeries of Troutwine are baking for the Grand Duchess's tea ball tomorrow, and we all have our parts to play. The head baker smiled again, a little ruefully this time. Bakery number 1 is doing the first tiers. Bakery number 2, the second and third tiers. Fillings are being produced by bakeries 3, 4 and 5, while number 6, 7 and 8 are baking pastry shells and meringues. Bakeries number 10 and 11 are fruitcake and turnovers, and bakery number 12 is making floating islands. Balthazar Burbab took a deep breath. Which means, once again, bakery number 9 is picking up the crumbs. The apprentice bakers began to mutter. It wasn't fair. They had tried so hard, but they weren't being given a chance. I know, said the head baker. It's not ideal, but after last year's cake collapse and exploding eclair incident, bakery number 9 has a lot to prove. But it wasn't our fault, protested one of the gnomes. The last head baker didn't pay off the League of Rats, said Langdale, the goat boy, stamping his hooves, and they ruined everything. Nothing was proved, said Balthazar gently. I'm head baker now, and things are different, aren't they? Zam, the other apprentice, nodded. It was true. Bakery number 9 had changed since Balthazar Burbab had taken over. No more bullying, tantrums, or random punishments. The kitchen was a happy place, and everyone was respected and baking beautifully. It was just as well. A year ago, after the disaster of the last tea ball, bakery number 9 had almost been shut down and everyone sent home. If Balthazar hadn't joined them from the fashionable bakery number 12, the apprentices would have had no future. None of them wanted to let him down. But what about the rats? Asked Langdale anxiously. Let me worry about them, said the head baker, doing his best to sound cheerful. After all, we've heard nothing from the rats since I arrived. Meanwhile, you have baking to do. We will be making the crusts as well as gingerbread and some spun sugar decorations. And at the tea ball itself, Balthazar cleared his throat. Even he couldn't sound cheerful after the next bit. Bakery number 9 will be doing the washing up. The apprentice bakers groaned. Langdale and the Shellac sisters are on short crust pastry shells, Balthazar instructed. Gnomes are on glazed pie crust. Zam, are you confident to bake the gingerbread and help me with the spun sugar? Yes, head baker, said Zam excitedly. I've already been down to the flavour library. Baker's pet, muttered Langdale. Balthazar gave the goat boy a stern look. But before he could say anything, an unexpected sound silenced them all. In the shop, the doorbell had rung, and now they could hear the scritch-scratch of claws on the floorboards. I smell a rat, said Langdale.